Well, hello, scholars. This video is for the school practicum assignment and for anyone interested in the principle 3 of the enduring learning principles. And today we're focusing on principle 3, contextualization. So let me share my screen with you to show you our little brief that we have here with all of the principles. So we've talked about joint productive activity, where students and teacher are creating something, and it can also be students and other students creating something. There should be some sort of a product, productive product. Think about that. Language and literacy development, we've talked about that as well, with the basic interpersonal communication skills, BICS, and CALPS, with CALPS being the cognitive academic language proficiency. And that one, the CALPS, is the more formal language that you need to participate in particular learning communities or social communities. As human beings, we use language to create meaning, and so you need to understand and share the right assumptions and languages and vocabulary in order to make meaning. So jokes aren't funny if the other people don't get the meanings. So we talked about that. We've also talked about principle 6, critical stance, where we're looking at our environment. How do we find our social settings that we're in, and who is included, who isn't, what can be done, why aren't they included? So we know that in general, U.S. society's mainstream tends to privilege middle class, primary English speaking, heterosexual, white normative standards. And so then any difference from that is often seen as a deficit. So how can we reconfigure that so that everyone is fully welcome, fully able to participate? We also talked about student-directed activity, which is principle 8, and that is where students have choices about their learning, and they make decisions. They should have options, and then teachers help them to make good decisions about what's positive learning for them. Okay, so what is contextualization? It says, connect teaching and curriculum to experiences and skills of students' homes and communities. Okay, so if you happen to be in Cedar City, Utah, and it's the fall, you know that there's a heritage festival that will be happening at the end of October, and you will see sheep coming through Main Street. And so there's a lot of agricultural knowledge in this community. And so if you're teaching in this community, you should be able to contextualize what you are teaching to students' backgrounds and the knowledge in the community and the families and the students themselves. Okay, so what does that look like when we enact it in the classroom? The teacher designs and enacts. The teacher integrates the new activity and information with what the students already know from home, school, and community. So you're calling into their minds their prior knowledge, their existing frameworks for making sense of the world, and you're going to help them to bring the new knowledge into what they already know. And children and adolescents, just like adults, we like to know why we're learning something and why it would be helpful to us. So a lot of times, if you help learners understand the significance of it, like why is this important, students will often say things like, I'll never use this. This is stupid. This is boring. And that's because they don't see the connection of why they should learn it. And so if you contextualize it, that often helps. Okay, what do we mean by contextualizing? We'll go to Sarah's after school program study that she did some years ago, and she wrote out for us Standard 3, contextualization. What does that mean? Teaching and learning activities and joint problem-solving tasks that focus on authentic issues and problems encountered in participants' daily practice. So what kind of things come up in students' daily lives? For example, if you have young people who are interested in gaming, and they want to buy the latest software, you might connect their math problems to that. I know when I was teaching third grade in Salt Lake City School District, I did not know a lot about Jazz basketball. That's the professional basketball team. But I learned about the statistics of the players because my students followed Utah Jazz basketball very closely. And so I would connect their interest to our math and also to local news and social studies sorts of things. So I keyed in on what students were doing, what they were interested in. Many of my students went back to Mexico to visit grandparents and family members during holidays. And so we talked about things like money exchanges, distance traveled, best routes mapping. There's many ways to contextualize, but it should be authentic. Like, what do we actually need to do? If we want to use our money at the school store, that's authentic because they want to buy something. And connecting teaching and curriculum to the students' experiences and skills of home and community. Okay, so do you remember the butterfly girl story? And the girl was killing the butterflies in her story. And the teacher said, we don't kill butterflies, they're beautiful. The teacher did not understand the home knowledge or the community knowledge. And there's a lot of agricultural knowledge in that story. And so the teacher would be able to connect like cabbages and other insects which would be harmful to crops. That would be a great way to contextualize that. Okay, so let's see if Sarah's got some examples of principle 3 for us. Let's see what she's got. So she says, let's see, where's that? Still 2. Here's 3. Okay, what does she have for an example? Okay, she says the homework club is contextualizing. Let's see if we agree with her. The students were attending this after school program, and they would attend this homework club. They work toward making connections between school and home. The homework club staff have made an effort to get to know the students. Yes, how are you going to contextualize if you don't actually know your students? Many teachers drive in to the school and the neighborhood, but then at the end of the day, they drive out. I did not live in my students' neighborhood either. I lived in South Salt Lake, and I taught in the Rose Park neighborhood in Salt Lake City School District. So I lived in Granite School District, but I did do a lot of shopping in the Rose Park area, and I went to the local sports events where I knew my students were involved, and they enjoyed attending things. So I went to the parks there. So I got to know that community very well as my own community. So you can't really contextualize if you don't know your students. Start with the learner, not the lesson plan. So the exchange between Miguel and Miss Junso is an excellent example of contextualized learning. Miss Junso's sincere interest in him and his homework assignment helped him to personalize his assignment and to complete a well-written story. So that makes sense, right? So if you're doing some sort of homework and you link it to what they're doing in their home lives, the students are more likely to make more meaning out of it. It'll make more sense. They know how to do that at home, so they'll know how to bring that into the classroom. The one thing that I would caution you about with contextualizing is sometimes teachers want to bring the students' gifts, their primary language, their cultural knowledge, their communities, cultural wealth, like navigational knowledge, social networking. They want to bring that into the classroom, and they want to use it as like sugar to make the medicine go down a little sweeter, or maybe honey to make the medicine go down. So the curriculum's kind of bitter, and it's not about them or for them or by them. So they don't see themselves, the students, maybe they are Latinx students, and all of the stories that they read and all the poetry are written by people from U.S. society's white mainstream. And so the teacher might be using the students' background knowledge and their cultural wealth to help that white curriculum go down a little smoother. Do you see what the problem with that would be? You have to be very cautious about that. So the point that Dr. Ladson-Billings makes is that students' background knowledge belongs in the curriculum because it belongs in the curriculum, not because it makes the white mainstream curriculum go down a little bit better. These students have just as much right to have their identity, their voices, their presence acknowledged and in the curriculum. I know it's a sore spot for me that we always have, like, Women's History Month is in March, but I guess the rest of the other 11 months are for men's history, right? So, but yet women were making contributions all year, all the time. And so we shouldn't just have the contributions of people who identify as female in March. Does that make sense? So people should have their experiences in the curriculum because they belong in the curriculum, not simply because it helps the white curriculum go down a little smoother. Okay, so let's see what other examples. What other examples they had. Miss Harrison invited guest teachers who have presented information in ways that were relevant and interesting to the students. They created intersubjectivity by making explicit connections between the subject matter and the students' real lives and knowledge. That makes sense, right? And how to contextualize. Let's see if we can look at a video and see if we can understand a little bit more about contextualization. This is a math teacher, which I think is very helpful because a lot of times people have the mistaken belief, even math majors and mathematicians and math teachers who major in mathematics, sometimes they think that math is just about algorithms and knowledge, about numbers, and they don't realize that mathematics is actually very culturally specific. And all of our knowledge systems come out of social groups that are situated in history and place. And so we're trying to make meaning, like, why did we need the zero? Why was the zero even invented? Because there was a cultural need amongst a group of people. So sometimes when people think about culture, they think about a food, fun, fiesta, they think about quinceañeras and cradle boards or something like that. But those are like important surface level manifestations of culture. Culture really means like these ways of thinking about and interacting with each other and the world around you. So human beings, we're social, so we need each other. We do best in groups, and will die without social interaction. You think about a new baby born into the world, they need a lot of care, will die without that. And so even if you were to incarcerate me and put me away from other human beings for a long time, that would definitely affect my mental capacity and the well-being of my body, because we are social creatures. So we problem solve in small groups, in large groups, families, neighborhoods, nation state societies. We problem solve about how is a good way to create our idea of what's the good life. So that will differ from group to group over time. Eastern civilizations often get left out over time, because in the United States and Western society and civilization, we tend to think about the Greek civilizations and the city-states, and like Athens and then Rome. And we tend to think about European history, and we don't really think about like China or India and the huge civilizations, or even Africa, right? And so there's all these different civilizations that have created meaning. And when we only focus on Western ways, not just the US West, but the Western world ways, then we're missing whole groups of knowledge systems and ways of doing things. And mathematics developed in very interesting ways in Eastern civilization, even though we tend to be more familiar with Western civilization ways. So we have to dig and go find Eastern. But the history of mathematics in the Eastern civilizations is very, very interesting. It's not just about numbers, it's very culturally based. So with that said, how, and we thinking about numbers, how do we contextualize that? So here's a teacher talking about how she contextualizes
About
it.
the importance of contextualizing math for her students. I asked her to tell me a little bit more about that approach.
Contextualizing is really important for my student because a lot of struggling students, they have difficulty with transferring. They learn something with a teacher, they're really capable of doing it, and they show the teacher they can do it. Then they switch class, they switch teacher, and suddenly something they knew, they are not able to show it to the new teacher. So to me, the transfer problem, I address this problem with contextualizing the math. The more it's
I'm going to stop right there just for a second. She's a special education teacher. And just like many important approaches to teaching, uh, it works well when students come to your classroom and they don't maybe learn in the way that a lot of children do. They have their own developmental level and their own zone of proximal development that they're reaching toward. But this is not simply for special education classrooms. Even think about yourself. I'm thinking about myself. If I really don't get what the purpose of this is, I'm not going to learn it very deeply. It's not going to be in my long-term learning. I might be able to keep it in my short-term learning for a little while, but unless I really understand it and have learned it in a robust way where I can take it somewhere else, and generalize it and use it in other contexts, it's not likely to stay with me. So she's talking about special education students, but this is not just for special education students, and it's not just for K-12. University students need this just as much. Why do I need to know this? Why is it helpful? How does it connect to my real life?
Contextualizing to something they can refer to, real life situation, and even I use example of the thing that interests them. So the first class I asked them, what are your interests? Just shopping interests. And after, when I give problem related to money or linear equation, I pick what they told me they would like to buy. So in a problem, because I know some of my students, they would like to buy video games, I would put video games into that, and then we can refer. Remember when we said that Michael wanted to buy a new game, what was the equation? And I can relate the same content, the same knowledge, but really related to something that interests them more. So I think it's not like a very big difference from what we used to teach before, but maybe we're more concerned about the student learning math, and also we are more conscious of the needing to be connecting math with real life situation. And my student, I see with the new program, because we're trying Sec 3 this
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there. So she's talking about math, which is often, as I mentioned earlier, something that people think you either get the algorithms or you don't. That's not true. It definitely has to be contextualized. How do you use math in your life? We use math in a lot of ways. So you could link that up to joint productive activity. You could link that up to criticality. um why are certain groups of students backgrounds completely left out of the curriculum? When I give students the cultural literacy test, and they don't know what the Braceros program was, even though that's a main event in US society, um it's not because my students aren't smart, but because they haven't been taught it before. And so they don't always know these things or how to make connections to it in their real life. So chemistry, I've seen, I've with student teachers, I have sat through some of the most boring chemistry lessons, and chemistry is actually super exciting if you think about how these just different elements can come together, combine, create different things. Like, let's say that that the students like to drink soda. There's a lot of chemistry that goes into that. Cooking, there's just I think contextualization can be so fun if you start with the learners and you get to know them. You start with the learners, not the lesson plan. Then you can contextualize all that you do and help it seem relevant to them. The more relevant it seems to them, the more that they're going to have it in their long-term learning. So especially with new teachers, not just new teachers, but often this is the case with new teachers, they want to say, what are my strategies? What strategies can I use? So they're thinking about themselves. What are my strategies? But you have to actually start with the learner, not the lesson plan in your strategies, and say, but how are they going to learn? Do you see how it's so backwards if you start with the strategies? You don't know which strategies are going to work unless you know your students and you know what you want them to learn. So if you know your students and you contextualize it, then you choose your strategies to help you contextualize it. And that will foster more long-term learning for them. Okay, so again, I should see contextualizing in your lesson very consistently. If I am coming to evaluate your teaching, I should really see contextualizing. Why are we learning this? How does it relate to my life? How is it used in outside of the classroom and outside of my textbook? So many times students fill out worksheets and then they go home or go out to the recess or something, and they have no idea that what they learned in class is actually for real life. So make those connections for them and contextualize it for them. And that will really help foster higher order thinking skills, high levels of academic achievement. It certainly is going to foster high levels of cultural competence, right? If I'm contextualizing what they have to learn and pass on the standardized test, they're learning to walk in both worlds, right? And then criticality, why don't we see girls in math and science, right? And I'm very intentional about making sure that girls are fully participating in math and science. So I'm contextualizing and hitting all three of those primary principles from Dr. Latson-Billings simply by contextualizing. And then when I add in some of these other things, like I can be using my language and literacy development to move beyond basic interpersonal skills, which people learn really quickly. I can develop, like, how do scientists talk? How do mathematicians talk? They have a specialized vocabulary. So I can be contextualizing while I'm using principle 2, while I am setting it up so that principle 8 is there, while principle 6 is there. Do you see how I'm hitting these all at the same time? You don't have to hit all of them in a lesson, for sure. And it does depend on where are you in your unit of teaching. Are you at the beginning where you're just doing introductory things? Or are you at the end of a unit where you're doing more cumulative things and you're having your students synthesize and apply what they've been learning? So that's going to make a difference too. But if you have in your head as you're teaching and you're lesson planning, you're like, I need to be hitting these. I need to be hitting these 8 enduring principles of learning so that I'm fostering high levels of academic achievement, high levels of cultural competence, high levels of criticality. Then you know that you are working as a dream keeper teacher. You are fostering successful teaching and learning for all learners, not just for those learners that fit most closely with the white mainstream. You are working against the leaking educational pipeline, and you are helping other learners and all learners to get through that educational pipeline, because education is the way. Okay, does that make sense? All righty. Well, I enjoyed you, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and go ahead and end our meeting.